emotional. I cried when I walked in here yesterday to see what they had done. This is decades worth of stuff. A lot of it I'd never seen, a lot of it I had. I met Artie in '77 over at CG's. I probably met John around the same time. And early days going up to the loft, he was printing shirts in the loft already then. And they had pipes running across the ceiling and just lined up, and the smell of that silk screen and everything. It was pretty amazing. But nobody had ever really written the story of how we got to the logo design. And when the Queens Museum show happened, I thought, well, I should do a story, to tell people how this logo came to be and why it got so popular. So this is, the story itself is printed on the wall over there. It's online. But I'm going to talk through the photos here to explain it a little bit more. So in 1971, Arturo was living in Mexico City. And he really wanted to be in theater. He wanted to be a performer in theater. And he was hanging out with an artsy crowd that they called hippies and drug addicts back in Mexico. It was, where's the microphone? Sorry, I forgot. It was a bad scene for hippies and drug addicts and gays in Mexico. They were killing people. So he got arrested at a party in 1971, this is the headline, and it was quite frightening. But it was really the artist group, but the government was very threatened by them. So after that happened, he left Mexico. He had come from a wealthy family, actually. They had silver mines in Chihuahua. This is North Mexico, and he had gone into Mexico City to be an artist and performer. So he left. But he carried this clipping around with him. The key thing in this clipping is right here. This was the headline, also this lettering, this font of the lettering. So he carried this around with him. He was in San Francisco for a while. He ended up in New York City. He was painting grocery store signs using, if you see the grocery store signs, they use that all caps letter. So that was something that really stuck out to him with lettering. And then we'll go to the next one. Oops, wrong way. So he was the loft a block away. There was a staircase up on the left, and all the doors were open on each floor. He used to keep the door open, and the people going up and down. Didi Ramon had a girlfriend who lived on one of the floors above him. And Didi was going up one day, and the door was open, and he poked his head in, and Arturo was painting. But he was doing the grocery store signs, and Didi said something like, "Is this art? Like, what are you doing?" And Artie was like, "I think so. Like, does it look like art?" And Didi wasn't sure, but he said, "I don't know." He said, "I don't think art's that important." But he said, "You should come see our band. We have a band playing at CBGB's, and you really should come see us." Artie was like, "Cool." So he went to see the band, blown away, of course, as primitive as it was, although that was around 70, I guess that would have been 4? When would that have been, John? Yeah. 73, 4?
Arturo song, but they first played CBGB's in August 74.
4. Okay, so it would have been 74, around 74. So Arturo, thinking visually, said, "Well, you guys need to step it up. Why don't I do a backdrop?" So this is the first backdrop that he did, and just using all the caps lettering. All right, so the caps lettering needed to go on a shirt. They were playing some gigs out of town. Artie wanted to come to the gigs. They had no money to pay him. So I think he made 3 dozen shirts the first run that just looked like this. Just with the, oops, wrong way. Just looked like this, just with the lettering that he had like on the banner. And then this was his hatchet necklace that he wore a lot. I have one here. The Great Frog, a UK company, did a reproduction of it that they've sold for many years. I think there's still some on eBay. So this was the first, the shirt. And the band was wearing, you know, I guess the Carvana, not glue, you know, they had written a song on that. So then, for some reason, he put it into parentheses for reasons I never quite understood. But this was the second incarnation of the shirt. And the band was wearing like what Johnny had there. They were in a lot of, you know, cartoon imagery and the magazines at the time, the rock magazines and stuff. So I never quite understood the parentheses, but that was the second incarnation. So then Arturo, and they have it here in the case, he found a white leather belt somewhere in the store here that had this really cool eagle design on it. And he was struck by the eagle for two reasons. It came from the Nacional headline, and also, I don't know if he was thinking presidential seal at that point, he might have been, but it was definitely from the Nacional logo. All right, this is Robbins. This was hard to find. I found this photo. I interviewed Howie Pyro and Paul Zone and Chris Stein, who had all been around then, and they told me that pre-trash and vaudeville in the early 70s, the underground scene, I don't know if they were calling themselves punks yet, but they were looking for cool clothes. And in addition to thrift stores, this place, Robbins, was selling clothing from Poland. And there's a few of them here. That's one of the shirts. There was another design that it's on one of the other, on one of the mannequins or something. But anyway, he was taken by this design with those arrows. And it was really just an inexpensive shirt. You can see on the label it was made in Poland. He bought a bunch of them. There's several in the Ramones Museum in Berlin. And Artie, I'm sure, had a ton of them in the archives, right? Aldo, did you find a bunch of them?
Yeah, a handful of them. They got chevron. Yeah, and we have the one black and red and the squares and the blue and kind of angular optical squares.
And packages too, right? There was still some in packages. Yeah, he bought a bunch of them. He was really taken with it. So that arrow design worked its way into the next, they were also selling like plastic raincoats and just all kinds of weird stuff there. Howie Pyro, his whole early sort of punk look and degeneration was based on clothes from Robbins. All right, so here's Arturo in the famous shirt. And he loved these sort of Elvis-y glasses. He would always tell me if I ever saw them anywhere to buy a whole bunch and he would pay me back. He just really loved those for some reason. And he took a lot of these self-portraits. Let's see. So that's the white belt buckle. They have it in the case over here. It's really clean. It's in really good shape. I don't know if those were multiples too. But that was the eagle with the arrow. And here's Artie. That's a godless photo?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. This was what year? 70?
77 or 78.
77, 78, in CB's, right?
Yeah.
So here's Artie getting the look together with the glasses and the hatchet and the other thing, they used to decorate all the leather jackets. They used this US pin. A lot of them had that on there. I helped sell Dee Dee Ramone's archive about 2 years ago, and almost everything he had was studded with these US pins. So also tying into the presidential seal stuff. So Artie made a lot of collages. He would do self-portraits. There's a bunch of them, I know, on display here. So pulling together the shirt and the buckle. And then this is the presidential logo. So he couldn't run it like this, obviously. He had to tweak it. So this is how he changed it. Now, this is, obviously pre-computer and everything. Everything he did was by hand, paste up. He would spread out the banners on the floor. So all of this was paste up, and then I think he had to go to, where did you guys go? Like a Sir Speedy back then, or places that would take a photo of it and, you know, so it would look like a finished design? Is that, yeah. FedEx places or something. So that's the finished design, and it says look out below. Up there he changed that. He put a baseball bat. Johnny was a big baseball fan, so we did that for him. This was apples, because he felt like they were the all-American band rather than the olive branch that was on the original logo. And then here's the shirt. Here's the red and white arrows. And of course, over the years, the names got switched around as people came and went. But that's the design. Now, it was on the back of one of the albums. That's the first time that it appeared. Yeah, there it is. So this was the first time that the logo appeared, even before the shirts, I'm pretty sure. He did the art more for the album cover, and then it went on to the shirts. This is great songs on here, really one of the best. So then it all comes together, and there it is. There's the logo, the classic logo with the El Nacional lettering, and then the logo with all the elements on there. So then it had to go on banners, because he was thinking big and they were starting to play bigger places. He actually did banners in a lot of different sizes, because sometimes they would play clubs that, you know, it was lower or bigger or, you know, different configurations. So he had a lot of different banner sizes that he put together. And this was on the floor of the loft. I remember going over there and, you know, it'd just be laid out, don't walk on it, you know, don't spill anything. And he'd be on there, you know, laying down, painting these things, and really meticulous, had to be perfect. Everything had to be perfect. He worked so clean. If you had ever been in that loft, there wasn't a speck of paint on the floor. I would bring other artists up there, and they didn't even believe this was an artist studio, because it was just too clean. I was like, that's the way he is. I said, and he also, the way he painted, most of it was flat, because he did a lot of taping for the lettering, because it was such clean angles. So it wasn't like splattering paint with brushes and all that. So here's another view of him doing the logo. He finally found somebody, gosh, I guess this was, maybe 10 years before he passed. He found a tattoo artist he liked enough to put it on his back. And he did some tweaking with it. He put an R for Ramones, and he put his name in there instead of the current drummer. You know, Tommy had dropped out pretty early, so he couldn't fit everybody's name plus his, so the drummer had to go, I guess. He also had some cool tattoos on his arms he started to get. This is a love tattoo, E pluribus unum, which is on the money seal. You can see in Kurt Hopp's wonderful painting over there, he had just and necessary in Spanish on his chest. So here's Artie posing for young Artie. Actually, he was in his 30s already, because this was in the 70s, and he was born in 46, so he was already in his 30s here. And you can see the taping. You know, he would tape it and then paint the blue in there, and then, you know, the more blue in there, the red, alternating the colors. This is a great shot by Keith Green. Did Keith come to the opening? I didn't see him. I haven't seen him in a while. Keith did a lot of really great shots of Artie, and also Dee Dee at the Chelsea Hotel. He did a great series. But this is one of the finished banners, and it's draped over, he had a big work table there. That was actually the table where the Ramones signed their deal. So he kept that table in the loft there. And this wall back here was pretty much a rotating gallery. He collected and encouraged a lot of East Village artists, which is what became the basis for Howl, because he told Jane Friedman that I want you to show East Village artists and keep their archives if you can. So all of that started with Artie collecting and encouraging Lower East Side artists. It, maybe didn't get as successful or didn't really have a permanent gallery, but he had quite a lot of other people's stuff. The Hambleton show, which is really great. Everybody should go see it down at the other gallery at 250 Bowery. He told me at one point over 300 pieces of Hambleton, because he had let Richard come to the loft. He would buy the paint supplies. He would feed him. He would make him quesadillas. And then he would store the art, because Richard was living on the street, and he would just sell it or it would get stolen right away. So thanks to Artie, there's hundreds of really great Hambletons saved in the Howl archive. All right, so this is at the Queens Museum. This was in 2016. Mark Miller and Arturo had been working on a retrospective for the Ramones, and these are my 3 shirts. I must have a collection of 30 or 40 shirts that Artie had given me over the years, and I lent these 3 because they were sort of like the girl shirts to the show. So this was in the Queens Museum, and these went on to the Grammy Museum as well, out in Los Angeles. So it was a smaller show out there, but they took these shirts. And there's Deborah wearing one of them. And then they were making surfboards, and he just really went to town with the merchandising. He used to go to, there were conventions in Las Vegas that were just strictly licensing conventions. So the people there would have all the stuff that you could put your logo on. So that's where he really started, with the lunch boxes and the bags and the plushies and the animals and the surfboards, all that stuff, the wallets, he wasn't manufacturing those at all, but he would give them the logo and the imagery, and then they would send him back samples, and he would approve them, and then they would get made. So the licensing and the merchandise just went worldwide. There's a story he had told me that at one point they played a 60,000 seat stadium in South America, I think it was Argentina, and everybody there bought a $25 shirt. You do the math, it's over $1 million. And this was in the 80s, maybe 90s. So that's success. So one last image from the Queens Museum. I ran into this girl, I think her name was Christina, and she had that shirt on. And I said, you look pretty young. Where did you get that shirt? She had found it in a thrift shop. She didn't even know that it had been the Polish shirt from the logo. And I took a picture of her, and I just thought, did you know that that's the major inspiration? And she really didn't even know, which I thought was kind of funny. And that's it. That was the history of the logo. Any questions? Hi, Luigi.
Hi there. Great presentation.
Right now, the copyright. Arturo made a deal once Johnny Ramone died. He was the Ramones came down to Johnny and Joey. Dee Dee was left early. He was still getting royalties for his songs, but he wasn't part of the official Ramones productions. Once Tommy left, every drummer after that was on salary. So it came down to Johnny and Joey. So Arturo made a deal when Johnny finally died that he would continue to do some designs and things for him, but upon his death, it would revert to Ramones Productions. So they basically have the copyright, and the license to continue to do all the designs with it. So that's who has it. But all these originals are in Arturo's archive. Boxes and boxes. Aldo got the pleasure of going through everything the past few weeks, and he said it's boxes and boxes of everything. And these were original designs, but, the way that Arturo worked, it wasn't like the band was ordering a shirt and a plushie and a surfboard. He just, would produce and produce and produce. He worked all the time, so the designs came from him, but also in collaboration with the people that he was licensing the things to. And it continues to sell. From what I understand, it's still selling really well. I travel a lot. I was in Venice for the Biennale last year, and I must have seen a half dozen people walking around with Ramones shirts. So it's good to see.
I have a question. Yeah, I have 2 questions. One,
What's the question?
When he was alive, was he getting royalties from the merch? And also, can you talk about your relationship with him a bit? Like,
With
how did
Artie?
you meet him?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
When he was alive,
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
When he was alive, did he get royalties from the merch? And
Arturo?
Also
Oh,
and
yeah.
talk
Oh, yeah, of
about your
course.
relationship
Yeah.
with him.
The relationship changed once Johnny died. Everything changed. But yes, he made a deal with them that he would continue to do things, but after he passed, everything would go back over to Ramones Productions.
He asked also what your relationship was to Arturo, right?
Yeah.
To Arturo? Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And what was your relationship to Arturo?
Oh, me? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was them. I met Artie in '77. I went to CBGB's for the first time. I came in from Larchmont. I had grown up, and my hipster friends, who later formed a band called the Student Teachers, they said, "Oh, you got to come downtown to the CBGB's," and I was like, "All right, whatever." And we were living in the suburbs. My father was a doctor. I thought it was very boring up there. And we went to CB's, and I was just like, "This is it. This is going to be my life, man." Changed everything. I was only 16. It didn't seem to be a problem. They would let us in, drinking, everything. One of the very early nights that I was there, I met Legs and John Holmstrom, and I remember going to the punk office, dump, I think the term was. Where were you guys, on Lafayette Street?
30th and 10th.
77, 78?
The yards is now, but the building's been torn down.
Yeah, really. All right, but I remember going there and seeing all the drawings and stuff you guys were working on. But yeah, the loft was really where it was happening at that point. I went there early. I do remember one of the early days still seeing mattresses on the floor. I think Joey was still living there, and Dee Dee and Vera lived there at one point. It was all open, and there was just a bathroom in the back. He hadn't built walls. He later built 2 bedrooms in there. It evolved over the years. But the first time I went there, I remember seeing mattresses lined up on the floor for the band. And, I started coming into the city, and I went to college. I took a year off. I graduated high school a year early. I took a year off, and I came in, I think, 5 nights a week, get on the train, or I would drive my mother's Buick. And she was very liberal. She was a nurse, and she'd say, "Just be home by 6 a.m. I don't care where you've been, but just be home by 6 a.m. My father had left at that point. So I think if my dad had been home, my life might have been different. But Mom was like, "Just be home at 6 with the car. It's okay." And yeah, it was great. I mean, we just went to all the clubs, and then I ended up going to Sarah Lawrence College in Bronxville. I was afraid to move into the city. I got accepted to NYU, but I just thought, I'll never do any work. I'll never go to class. It'll just be too much. So it was a smart move, but I lasted 2 years on campus, and then I got apartments in the city. I did an internship down at Metro Pictures Gallery. I met a lot of artists. Arturo was doing a lot of his own work when he had time then. I helped him. I was trying to help him get some shows, but he just wasn't home enough. The band at that point was touring like 10 months out of the year, and he just never had enough time to get a show together. I did finally get him a show in 1994 when I'd moved to Miami Beach. I got him his first show outside of New York City at a big gallery down there. I think he brought down word paintings and some of the flags, but it was mostly the word paintings that he was doing. And, you know, he would come to Miami. He liked it down there, and we traveled. We went to Mexico, but they got really busy. They were traveling a lot. So, you know, but we kept in touch, and I had seen him a few months before he died. I didn't know he was sick. He was doing a talk at the New Museum. I think, John, you were in the talk with Pat Smear and Mark Miller.
Oh, yeah.
You guys were giving kind of an overview of the music scene, the punk scene, art scene.
Arturo ended up taking over the show.
Did he?
He had this big 2-hour slide presentation of his whole career.
You know, it was interesting because he gave kind of like an overview of his whole life. You guys were all just focused on just the magazine or just the band that they were in or whatever. And he gave this overview of his whole life, but thinking back, I mean, I took pictures. He gave me his camera. And I was thinking back, I was like, you know, that was, I never saw him again after that night. It was in December 2012. And he traveled, and I know he was in Germany and he was in Mexico. And then around June, I started seeing all these pictures online, and I hadn't been able to get in touch with him on the phone for a few weeks. And I started seeing pictures online, and I said, something's up. And I made some calls, and Michael Lago, his good friend, said he's in hospice. I was like,
What?
Hospice?
Michael?
No. Michael Lago told me Arturo was in hospice. And I was shocked. I had just seen him, well, it had been about 5-6 months. And then he called me 2 hours later and said he died. So that was actually the last time that I saw him, and I thought it was interesting to hear kind of his version of his whole life story. You know.
They videotaped it. but
Yes.
No one's been able to track down that videotape from
Didn't Mark Miller arrange that? It was through the New Museum.
But he said in that video, it struck me, he claimed that that party in Mexico, he was somehow working with Alejandro Jodorowsky at the time. You know, the great filmmaker. So
Yeah,
I was wondering
Alejandro
more about whether
Jodorowsky.
part of his life was involved in, you know, whatever theater or film was going on.
Yeah, well, Arturo, when he came to audition for the touring version of Hair, that's how he met Jane Friedman.
He auditioned for Hair?
Yes, that's how he met Jane, because Jane's father was a big Broadway producer. He did the first version of Hair. Was it 69?
Oh, Hair.
Hair,
Okay.
yeah, on Broadway. And Jane's father was the original producer of that. There's now a theater in Times Square named after Jane's father, the Arthur Friedman Theater. But Jane was the publicist, and that's how she met Artie. And she liked him, and they became friendly. And then Jane moved into working with Patti Smith and was with John Cale and had a record label. So they stayed in touch all those years. But that's how they originally met. Yeah. He didn't get the part, by the way.
He did?
He did not get the part, no. Might have changed his life. Probably a good thing that he didn't, because he might have been off doing theater. You know.
Hey, John, didn't he do a slide presentation when we were up in Boston?
Yes, Cambridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did another talk with Arturo at Cambridge for the Harmony show that John
It was the old
Nicolai put
Passy
together.
coffee shop.
Huh?
The folk coffee shop, Passim's. I think it was renamed when we were there, but it was that same space in Cambridge.
Arturo was also
He
in the
did a
very
whole-
first punk art show that Mark Miller put together in Washington.
Oh, yeah?
And he was in the PS1 show, where Basquiat became famous.
Right, the New Wave New York.
Yeah, a bunch of us were in that.
I
I mean,
remember him doing a long presentation up in Boston.
Yeah.
He started showing more around. I remember when CB's had the gallery next door. They had the CBGB gallery, which is now Amanita, I think. But I was in there today. They changed the layout. It used to have different levels, and there was a basement and everything. But I remember he had done a show there, and he started to do some early art fairs that you could just rent a booth. It wasn't as vetted and stuff as it is now. But he didn't really sell much. There wasn't like a a record of his sales because he was just showing here and there, but he produced, I mean, he was doing, I would say a series at least every year, a series of new work every year. Every time I'd go to the loft, there'd be a whole new thing, and then it would disappear. And I was like, where did the work go? And he was storing it. He had a warehouse out in Red Hook in Brooklyn that got damaged in Sandy pretty bad. A bunch of his work got ruined. He had to yeah, he was panicking. It was in a really low point, and he had a big show in Mexico City coming up. And he was panicking because so much of the work got water damage. You know. He reconstructed a lot of it. But yeah, he stored it all out there. There was a lot, and then he started storing all the Ramones stuff there too. So, lots of storage, decades and decades. Another question?
When he was doing the merchandise on the Vogue, was he also doing the lighting?
Yes. Yes. I think he's an underrated lighting director. He was really obsessed with the lighting. If you've seen their shows, it was such a powerful part of the show. And I remember even he would come down to Miami and he would have these, this is pre-computers, he would have these big rolls of paper that he would plot out all the lighting, you know, the circles, and, you know, which gels were going where, and, you know, so that was the basic lighting that was going in the ceiling. And then he would have charts of how to run it for each song, depending on the set. Obsessed with the lighting. It wasn't something that he's gotten as much credit for. I mean, when they started playing really big shows, you know, you needed really strong lighting. And it was really powerful. And then he would blast, you know, just all white light, like blind everybody. But it was, yeah. And he would run from the lighting board, as soon as the show was over, he would, you know, pull all the switches down, shut it all down, and then run out to the merchandise booth to watch the crew that he had selling all the shirts. He, you know, and at that point, it was a, you know, you had to keep an eye on things. It was a cash business mostly for years and years, so he was keeping eagle eyes on the money, you know, and then it had to get split and deposited, and they were touring. But yeah, the lighting was a big part of it. I'm not sure what happened to all that lighting stuff. I guess that went with the band, with all the equipment. I don't think he kept to any of that. Design, it was all about design.